Welcome to the Unveiling Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Kimberly Mosby. Join me as I dive into powerful stories of resilience and strength. In each episode, I sit down with guests who have faced similar journeys of coercive control, financial manipulation, and personal invasion. Together, we uncover the shadows, share our experiences, and inspire others to reclaim their lives. Tune in, listen, and be a part of the community that stands tall against the forces that seek to control us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to review a little document with you. It's from the General Accounting Office of the United States government from 1994. And it's titled Human Experimentation, an Overview on Cold War Era Programs. And the statement is by Frank C. Conahan, and it said, for release on delivery expected at 10 a.m. Eastern, Wednesday, September 28, 1994. It says, as you requested, we focused your work on defense-affiliated programs that used human test subjects between 1940 and 1974. The programs included tests and experiments conducted or sponsored by the programs included tests and experiments conducted or sponsored by the departments of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, the Defense Nuclear Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Health and Human Services. The tests and experiments involved radiological, chemical, and biological research and were conducted to support weapon development programs, identify methods to protect the health of military personnel against a variety of diseases and combat conditions, and analyze U.S. defense vulnerabilities. Okay, I hate to laugh, but it's just, they never have stopped these programs, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. It says, precise information on the number of test experiments and participants is not available, and the exact numbers may never be known. However, we have identified hundreds of radiological, chemical, and biological tests and experiments in which hundreds of thousands of people were used as test subjects. Well, I'm pretty sure without their consent. These tests and experiments often involved hazardous substances such as radiation, blister and nerve agents, biological agents, and LSD. In some cases, basic safeguards to protect people were either not in place or not followed. For example, some tests and experiments were conducted in secret. Others involved the use of the people without their knowledge or consent or their full knowledge of the risks involved. I don't think it's fair. The effects of the tests and experiments are often difficult to determine. Although some participants suffered immediate acute injuries and some died, in other cases, adverse health problems were not discovered until many years later, often 20 to 30 years or longer. Federal programs provide benefits to former military and federal civilian employees who suffer from injuries or adverse health effects as a result of federal service. However, it is proven difficult to participants in government tests and experiments between 1940 and 1974 to pursue claims because little centralized information is available to prove participation or determine whether adverse health effects resulted from the testing. To address these problems, specific efforts have been made by some involved agencies to help groups of test participants obtain the information necessary to pursue claims. For some reason, I have a hard time believing all of this and why all of these government agencies would need to be involved. I'm sorry. It's like if you've got the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Defense Nuclear Agency, the CIA, and the Department of Energy, and the Department of Health and Human Services in this testing, why would all of those need to be involved if it's for national defense purposes? Government testing and experimentation with human subjects continues today. And this is in 1994, so it's still going on. I can tell you it's still going on today. For example, the Army's Medical Research Institute for Infectious Disease uses volunteers exotic diseases. Whatever that is, probably more like created diseases, but whatever. Next, these test experiences were to protect the health of military personnel against a variety of diseases and combat conditions, and analyze U.S. defense vulnerabilities. Healthy adults, children, psychiatric patients, and prison inmates were used in these tests and experiments, probably without their consent. The government has sponsored extensive testing, but precise information on tests and participants is not available. Who are these people? I don't know. It's just a lot of paperwork. I've been doing a lot of research. Some records have been lost or destroyed, and existing documentation contains limited information and often does not identify names of participants. Well, it's hard to do that if you're doing it without their consent. Moreover, these records are spread through the country at the National Archives, Federal Records Center, other government office, and the military commands or organizational units that created them. Some of the record measures thousands of linear feet, and the availability and quality of indexes to records vary widely. Well, I mean, if you're spreading them all over the country, then it's hard to, piecemeal it together to bury it, right? I'm just using common sense here. In a series of experiments conducted between the 90s and 1960s, the Atomic Energy Commission and the U.S. Public Health Service funded research of the potential medical effects on people from fallout after a nuclear attack or accident. In some of these experiments, university researchers exposed mentally disabled children to low doses of radiation. Years after the experiments were completed, a task force found that researchers failed to satisfactorily inform the subjects' families about the nature of the risk of the experiments in order for them to make an informed decision when they gave their consent. The president of one of the universities involved in the experiments later apologized for the use of children and the failure to provide full information about the nature and risk. We are not aware of what, if any, further action was taken in this case. This is completely disturbing. But the fact that's even more disturbing is they're doing it today on a global scale through chemtrails, cloud seeding, weather manipulation, which is causing people to have cancer. And I know that because my daughter's cancer was very environmentally induced. She was very sensitive and she was gorgeous inside and out. Okay, next. I'm not going to read it all because it's 29 pages. From 1952 to 1975, the Army conducted a classified medical research program to develop incapacitating agents. The program involved testing nerve agents, nerve agent antidotes, psychochemical agents, and irritants. The chemicals were given to volunteer service members at the Inglewood Arsenal, Maryland, and 4 other locations. Army documents identify a total of 7,120 Army and Air Force personnel who participated in these tests, about half of whom were exposed to chemicals. During the same period, the Army Chemical Corps contracted with various universities, state hospitals, and medical foundations to research the disruptive influence that psychochemical agents could have on combat troops. The Air Force also conducted experiments on the effect of LSD through contracts at 5 universities. According to the Air Force officials and records, approximately 100 people received LSD in these experiments. No effort has been made by the Air Force to determine if the participants' names are available in the university's records. Well, that can't be just them because they already just previously stated that they were doing research with participants in some medical facilities. That could be psychiatric institutions, prison institutions, regular hospital institutions. I tried to stay out of all of the institutions. The Army conducted a series of biological warfare experiments and tests between 1945 and 1974. The purpose of these tests was to determine U.S. vulnerabilities to biological warfare. For example, between 1949 and 1969, the Army conducted several hundred biological warfare tests in which unaware populations were sprayed with bacterial tracers or stimulants that the Army thought were harmless at the time. Wow. Full of shit. Some of these tests involved spraying large areas, such as the cities of St. Louis and San Francisco, and others involved spraying more focused areas, such as the New York City subway system and Washington National Airport. Now, I'm just going to logically deduct something, because you have one of the largest homeless populations in San Francisco where they sprayed this stuff, right? And then also there's a pretty big homeless situation in New York City. I mean, it's all over the country now because everybody lost their shit during the pandemic, but whatever. It appears, in another Army experience conducted between 1959 and 1974, approximately 2,200 volunteers were exposed to biological pathogens such as the Venezuelan and I'm not sure what that is, and tularemia as part of their research to develop vaccines and antidotes. A list of all studies and medical records of all volunteers are located at the Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Disease in Fort Detrick, Maryland. It appears that the participants were adequately informed. Well, if you got a smaller test subject and you're not testing it on the full population, then you have records of your conduct. Effects of the experiment are often difficult to determine. The effects of government tests on participants' health have been difficult to determine. At the time of the test, some people were clearly harmed. However, in other cases, possible adverse health effects related to the substances were unknown or did not become apparent until years later. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but it's not. For example, in our February 1993 report on the Army's chemical testing program, we noted that the first health problems for most of the veterans who sought assistance appeared many years after their military service, and at the time when these same ailments typically show up in their general age population. Further, only a few veterans alleged that their health problems were long-term in nature, dating back to their active military duty. We reported that 97 out of the 145 veterans seeking assistance could not prove that their health problems were caused by participation in a test or experiment. Wow. Let's see what else this says. On February 1993, reports stated that military services lacked complete information on their chemical test activities and recommended that the DoD, the Department of Defense, aggregate the information and provide a point of contact within each service to assist veterans in obtaining information about their test experiences. DoD, in turn, established a chemical weapons exposure task force to identify chemical test information and task the secretaries of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force to provide information related to the task force. However, to date, the task force only employs one full-time investigator. The Army and the Navy have not designated points of contact to lead this effort. And 3, the service have not conducted a complete and thorough search of their records. Without this assistance, the VA continues to have difficulty assisting former test participants. And we're talking about only the VAs that are in the military, the ones that were aware and acknowledged that they were being experimented on, like lab rats. For example, we were told in September 1994 that VA claims that misdirections or 100 tests of information requests monthly because they do not know which agency should receive them. Similar situation exists with some other groups. For example, some agencies have made little effort to test participants by identifying test locations and participants in experiments conducted by contractors. Okay, so that's one other thing that I want to say, because when the government does R&D, research and development, they contract out to other private agencies to do their experimenting. So they don't have to report to anyone because they're not a government-affiliated agency. They may report back to the agency of the government that hired them, but they don't have to disclose that to the public. So my question to everybody else is that most of the government agencies are actually privately owned. And I'm not sure how to go after these people. I think we all just need to come together in a group and try to figure it out. I am just astonished because the 1947 Nuremberg Code of Ethics established the fundamental principles for scientists and physicians involved in using people as subjects in experiments and tests. In the Nuremberg Code, the respect for human rights of patients, including their voluntary consent and their safety from undue physical or psychological harm, was of paramount consideration. A 1953 memorandum from the Secretary of Defense to the Secretaries of Military Services directed them, in essence, to adopt the Nuremberg Code as a guide for human experimentation. However, according to the defense officials, some of the rules, including those related to the quality of informed consent and the capability of the subjects to withdraw without prejudice, were not followed in the 90s and 60s and even today. So this concludes, he says, this concludes my prepared statement, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Well, I have a lot of questions for the government, being a targeted individual. Now, there are a couple links that my friend Igor sent me, and it's about graphene. Now, graphite and graphene are totally different. Graphite is like multiple layers of graphene. And graphene, I think, is the most singular layer. But if you put that in people's food and you put it in the air that they're breathing, and you're on the Internet of Things, and then you've got your IP address, so your ass is on the cloud, then how do you think they're able to control you? I mean, that's a question. I'm just learning this myself. I don't have all of the answers. I'm just trying to do the best that I can and trying to stay strong while I'm doing it. So, stay strong. We've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Unveiling Shadows podcast. I hope today's episode has shed light on the experiences that too often remain hidden. If you or someone you know has a story to share, please reach out to me. Remember, you're not alone and your voice matters. Follow me on social media and subscribe to the podcast for more inspiring stories. Until next time, stay strong and keep unveiling the shadows.